Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this, what day is it today? I don't even remember. Wednesday afternoon. Yeah, I'm going through that college phase where it's like, you don't remember exactly what day of the week it is. You just know it's a day in the week and you got to go to class. But anyways, it's a Wednesday afternoon and we actually have like some other things to talk about in terms of basketball for right now, like actual real generating news that's going on aside from the previous list that I've been going through. So for the first segment, I'm going to be talking about some of the biggest questions for each Atlantic Division team. So this is I know I said we have news, but like I'm getting into that. So because essentially, with all of these, now that the season is about to start, now there's going to be a lot of growing questions about a lot of teams in the NBA, and I'm just going to go ahead and pick out which ones I think are like the biggest questions that are going to need answered in this season for each and every single one of these teams. And next, in the second segment, I'm going to talk about Charles Barkley and his opinions on the WNBA, particularly on how the WNBA players have been treating Caitlin Clark and how the league and the media sort of handles Caitlin Clark and things like that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that and his comments. And then in the third segment, we're going to talk about Anthony Edwards again. This time he's getting more backlash from his comment. This time it's from an NBA veteran. And if you're interested to figure out who that veteran is, then just wait until the third segment to figure that out. And then in the fourth segment, I'm going to be continuing with my list of the top players in the NBA. And we also have a special fifth segment, where in the fifth segment, I've been doing a list of players who I feel don't really deserve to win an MVP in a specific year. So I'm going to be continuing with that list in the fifth segment. But to figure out who I'm going to be talking about, you're going to have to wait until the end of the fourth segment to find that out. So before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody that we love to hear from you guys during the show, whether you have a hot take, a burning question, something you've been dying to share. We're all ears. It's all about keeping the conversation lively. And if you really want your comment to get noticed, then just go ahead and use Super Chat. You can send in your message and it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's a great way to support our channel as well. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, you can always use the link in the description or the link displayed below the ticker, GSMCpodcast.net. It also helps the show. It makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, link is GSMCpodcast.net. And let's go right ahead and get into the first segment, which is talking about some of the biggest questions for each and every single one of these Atlantic Division teams. So obviously, since I'm starting with the Atlantic Division, I'm going to continue on with the list with all the other divisions in future podcasts. Now, if you guys aren't really interested in this, just let me know and I won't continue doing it. But I just think that, it would be really interesting to just talk about some of the biggest questions for each and every single one of the NBA teams going into the next season. So let me just go ahead and pull up my notes real quick and pull up the slides so that way you guys can see. And the first team that we are going to be talking about is the Boston Celtics. Obviously, they're NBA champions and they're the best team in the NBA last season. So obviously, the biggest question for the Boston Celtics is, can this Celtics team be the first team in 6 years to win back-to-back championships? Because the last time we saw back-to-back champions was back when Kevin Durant was on Golden State. And before that, the last time we saw back-to-back champions was LeBron on the Miami Heat. And before that, let me think. Before that, which one was the other back-to-back champion? I believe that was the next back-to-back champion before the Miami Heat was the Lakers. Yeah, I believe that's what it was. That was and they won 3, so back to back to back if you really want to be technical. But yeah, these there haven't really been, at least, in recent history, there haven't been as many repeat champions as there have in previous years. And really, the biggest question for this is easily like the biggest question for Boston. Can they repeat and win one more time? And it's like that was the same. It was the same big question for the Denver Nuggets going into like last season. Like the biggest question for them for the last season was, can they repeat again? And so obviously the biggest question for every single championship team, in my opinion, is going to be, can they do it again? And the Bucks look like a potential dynasty after winning back in 2021, but Chris Middleton's injuries ended up being the downfall of basically, the entire hopes and dreams that the Bucks had before they acquired Damian Lillard. And there was obviously, logical explanation for why each of the last 5 championships before the Celtics were unable to repeat. But whether it be injuries, whether it be roster regression, or the rest of the league just catching up to them, like, will the Celtics fall into that same sort of rabbit hole as the other previous teams, where it's like every other team seems to catch up to them just like that? But let me know in the comments if you think there's a bigger question than this that needs to be answered for the Boston Celtics, because another question that I could really think of is, how will the Celtics maintain their roster in the future? That's like the other dying question that I want to know. But going into this season, I think there's no real need to worry about keeping the players in for the deep future now. Like right now, you're just looking to win back to back. Like right now, you're looking to win. And so the focus shouldn't be on long-term future, and the question shouldn't be on the future. It should be, can we win now? And like, obviously, the future is, I think that's, it's a later problem, especially with all of these luxury taxes and things like that. That is going to be a much later problem for the Boston Celtics that I don't think they should worry about now. Now, next team on this list is the Brooklyn Nets, and Ben Simmons. What? I'm not even going to talk about him. Anyways, the biggest question I have for the Brooklyn Nets, aside from, it would be, will Ben Simmons play? But I know he's not going to. So the biggest question is, will there be any kind of any more trades that Brooklyn decides to make in this regular season? Because they made a deal with Mikal Bridges, to deal away Mikal Bridges to the Knicks, and they've received a huge plethora of draft picks, and so they're committing to a full rebuild. And now the question is, are they going to try and get rid of some more players on their roster, like this one right here, and try to engage with trades amongst other NBA teams to try and improve the roster, or maybe even try to create some space to not only acquire players, but also be able to trade players, because now you have to do that. But the Nets, they've entered into that rebuild mode. And the Nets, it's really the question is, they might not be done dealing, because they still have Bojan Bogdanovic, who came back in the Bridges deal, and he could be a pretty valuable trade asset off of despite coming off of a wrist and foot injury and wrist and foot surgery. He is expected to be back in training camp, and when he's healthy, he's a pretty solid option, and he can give you a solid 15 points and really good 3-point shooting. So really, the question is going to be, are the Nets going to try and trade some more of their pieces? And going forward, every move this season should be made with the next several years in mind if you're Brooklyn. So if they can trade guys like Bogdanovich, Johnson, and Finney-Smith during the season, they could also put themselves in a position to land the number 1 overall pick in this draft, who a lot of people are thinking it's going to be Cooper Flagg. And even if it's not Cooper Flagg, next year's draft is expected to have a lot of good players, much more better players than this previous draft in the last season. So just to put that in a little bit of perspective. So next team on this list is the New York Knicks. And the biggest question for them is how badly will they miss Isaiah Hartenstein? Because Isaiah Hartenstein, while he wasn't really, an offensive demon, like a force on the offensive side of the floor, he was a very gritty player that would do a lot of the dirty work, would get a lot of rebounds, and would also get a lot of blocks and do a lot of the tough things that most players wouldn't want to do. And now the biggest question is, are the Knicks going to... Because that was part of the reason why the Knicks were so successful in their offense. Josh Hart and Isaiah Hartenstein being able to just hustle and not only snag boards but also create plays that wind up in the Knicks getting more chances and more possessions of the ball. And that's value. Like, it might not appear on the box score, but as it might not flash on the box score like Jalen Brunson's 40 points, but it does bring tremendous value to the team. It really, really does. So the biggest question is, are they really going to miss Isaiah Hartenstein after they let him go over to OKC? Because a lot of people, the entire Knicks roster, I believe, they really wanted Hartenstein to be a part of the team, and they also wanted OG to be a part of the culture that they were making as well. But it's like unfortunately, they can only pick one. So next team, because we are running a little bit low on time, is the 76ers. Now, obviously, the biggest question that anyone is going to ask about the 76ers is this finally their year? Ever since they had Joel Embiid, they were all like, trust the process. And it's just been, the process has still been ongoing. There have been several different lineups, several different roster changes, all with Joel Embiid at center, and none of them have been able to make it past the second round. And now that the 76ers, they have a really solid big three. Like, there is no complaints about anyone's offensive game or anyone's game about any of these players. Like, Ben Simmons, you could argue that, there was a complaint. He couldn't shoot, but he was still bringing value on the team. Like, that was before he went really, really just bad. He was still bringing value to the team. He just couldn't shoot. And Jimmy Butler, I mean, you could argue that his three-point shooting isn't really as good as it should be, but, he was still a very competent player. And then there's obviously Joel Embiid, but he's also injury-riddled. Now, in this season, there's, nobody that has a problem. None of the core players have a problem with performing under pressure. I mean, you might argue Paul George, but in recent years, Paul George has been pretty good in the postseason and has been delivering in the postseason. Like, he took the Clippers to their only Western Conference Finals. And again, the question for the 76ers, it's going to be, is this finally their year? Because they always say it every single time that it's going to be that they got it. This is the best chance that they have, and it always ends up falling short. And finally, we have the Toronto Raptors. Their question is this core that they have, with R.J. Barrett and Quickly and Scotty Barnes, is that really the core that you want to build around? I completely understand Barnes, like, without a doubt. I want Scotty Barnes to be the face of the Raptors, as well as the number one option on the Raptors. He's a fantastic player and a great, there's no flaw in his game. And, you definitely want to build around that young player, but around those two, like RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly, not entirely sure. I'm a little bit more sold on RJ Barrett given how he was playing for Canada in the Olympics, but still not entirely sold on that young core. Aside from Barnes, there's that young core, I'm not really sold on it. But that's all that I have for this first segment. So now we will go ahead and go into the second segment, where I talk about Charles Barkley and his comments about the WNBA. So I will be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about the comments that Charles Barkley has made about the WNBA, as well as how he feels about it and his opinions on primarily about how Caitlin Clark is treated around, not just the players, but around the media and the fans as well, and how a lot of these new rookies in the WNBA have been being treated recently. So, according to this article, from what has been said, this article, it was posted today at 10 o'clock, and Charles Barkley, this is all in the article. Charles Barkley believes that players of the WNBA are to blame for the negative attention surrounding Indiana Fever star Caitlin Clark. Now, I should also note that the Indiana Fever have clinched the playoffs, and this is the first time in 8 years that the Fever have clinched the playoffs. They went from the worst team in the WNBA to a playoff team in the WNBA. If that doesn't show you the greatness of Caitlin, I don't know what does. First year, immediately a winning team. And anyways, Charles Barkley, he says that much of Clark's stellar rookie season has been mired in toxic discourse that often extends far beyond the basketball quote. This is court, excuse me. This is just all in the article. This isn't me. So, through no fault of her own, many of those discussions have led to heated debates about gender and race. Some have interpreted the actions of WNBA veterans as acts of jealousy towards Clark and her popularity. Others have argued that on-court incidents, including flagrant fouls from Chennedy Carter, are simply examples of the kind of rough play a number one overall pick in the draft should expect. Now, Chuck appeared on the Bill Simmons podcast, and he called negative attention petty jealousness on the part of players. And he says, quote, "These ladies, and I'm a WNBA fan, they cannot have effed this Caitlin Clark thing any worse if they tried." Barkley said, "People believe what we say on television just because people don't like you or your personality. They can't get on TV and slander you. It's just total BS." That was his quote. Quote, "This girl is incredible. The number of attention, eyeballs she's brought to college and the pros, and for these women to have this petty jealousness, you're saying to yourself, what's going on here? And the thing I love about her, she never says a word. But these ladies, who I love and respect their game, they couldn't have messed this thing up any worse. There's been so much negativity, and a lot of it is petty jealousness." Now, Charles Barkley's comments are exactly what Ella Duncan called out in June. So it's not like he's the only one who believes this. And quite honestly, I'm completely with him on that side as well. Like, I feel like the negative comments that these WNBA veterans have given her is just completely unjustified and unfair. Because this is probably going to be the first WNBA season to ever generate a profit. Every single WNBA season, they always lose profit, and the NBA has to pump money into the WNBA just to keep it alive. And it happened every single year until Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese entered the league. And I have not heard a single veteran say anything good about her. I have not heard a single veteran say anything good about, like, in the WNBA right now, have not seen a WNBA player right now give Caitlin the hype that she most definitely deserves. We just have not seen it. And it's completely unfair for her because she is changing the way that people view sports altogether. Like, if Caitlin didn't exist, no one would be talking about the WNBA. I am sorry to say this, but this is just fact. This is just proven. And there hasn't, even somebody as good as Aja Wilson was unable to attract WNBA attention. Like, she put up 40 and 20 she has the most 40 and 20 games in WNBA history, I believe. And she just did this recently. And she barely gets. People will not know who she is unless they're WNBA fans. And the only reason why people even know who she is now is because Caitlin is in the WNBA, and now people are watching the WNBA, and now people are realizing how good Aja is. Because that's exactly what happened to me. And I know, like, I am a basketball fan, but before Caitlin, I was not a fan of the WNBA at all. I wasn't. I did not like how the females that were playing, I wasn't a big fan of their game. Like, a lot of their games I was not a big fan of. Now, if it was the Liberty, then sure, because I like Sabrina. Sabrina Ionescu was a baller, or is still a baller, honestly. But it's really, like, I never was able to get into watching WNBA basketball until these two, and more specifically Caitlin, entered the league. And then once they entered the league and I saw that Aja was a player, I was like, Jesus Christ, where has this woman been in the basketball world? Because I hadn't heard of her up until then. And it just like shows you just how crazy, like, the perspectives change just because of one player. And regarding the comments about, like, the racism towards Caitlin, that you do see that a lot on, like, the internet. Whenever anyone says that Caitlin is better than Angel, then everyone is immediately going to, like, do their thing, pull the race card. I'm not going to say anything on that, aside from the fact that this is supposed to be a conversation about basketball. Why do we have to bring in the color of people's skin? Because when I'm looking at both of them, I'm looking at how they play. I'm not looking at that. And I just genuinely don't understand how conversations elevate or debates, they elevate into something like that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But let me know what you guys think in the comments, or, like, maybe you guys have better insight on why you think it could sort of insinuate that. Because when I'm looking at a player on the court, I'm just looking at the player on the court, and, like, if I like the player and if I like what they do on the court, I'm going to like them. It doesn't matter whether they could be from anywhere. It don't matter. I'm going to like them. If I'm a big fan of their game, I'm going to be a big fan of their game. I don't see why the conversations have to boil down right into, like, politics and stuff like that, and political views and ideals and things like that. It isn't a geopolitical class. It's basketball, and we should only talk about basketball, and I just genuinely just can't stand it. But aside from that, that's all Charles Barkley really had to say. So let me go ahead and go into a break, and we're going to go into the third segment, which is talking about Anthony Edwards again, and he's going to be he's received a lot of backlash from his recent comments about Michael Jordan, and now he's getting even more backlash from Paul George. Yeah, Paul George is throwing shade at him on his podcast. So be sure to tune in after this short break to figure out exactly what Podcast P had to say about Anthony Edwards. So I'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be talking about Anthony Edwards getting more backlash from his comments, this time from Paul George. So if you guys remember from previous podcasts, or if you guys, have paid attention to the news recently, and like a couple of weeks ago, Anthony Edwards said, last month actually, Anthony Edwards said that players not named Michael Jordan who played before the 90s didn't have skill. It wasn't his exact quote, but that's what he was saying more or less. Like anyone aside from Michael Jordan back in the early 90s and in the late 80s did not have skill in the NBA. That's what he was saying. And a lot of old heads and a lot of current players, or like a lot of current and even current fans right now, are saying like how ignorant this and how sort of disrespectful this comment legitimately is. Hall of Famer Isaiah Thomas took exception to the claim. He's a five-time champion. Magic Johnson also had some responses towards Anthony Edwards. If you guys want to know what Magic Johnson had to say, you can watch my video on that on this channel. And if you guys are on the audio side, then you guys should be able to find that in one of the podcasts. I forget exactly which one it was, because I upload a lot of them, but I did talk about it on a previous podcast. So if you guys are interested in what Magic Johnson had to say about Anthony Edwards, then you can go ahead and find the video in the channel or find the podcast in the podcast list, whichever one you guys are using. And so, Magic, Isaiah Thomas, they all had something to say about Anthony Edwards. And, Isaiah Thomas and Magic, they have a combined 7. They have won the combined 7 of the 11 NBA championships from 1980 to 1990, which, again, merits the question. How could you say those players don't have skill if they've won 7 out of 11? Like, that's kind of a little bit insane. And if you want to add Larry Bird into that mix, then that's a whole different conversation. I'm surprised Larry Bird hasn't even said anything. He probably doesn't care, honestly. Now, 76ers forward Paul George, Podcast P, recently on his podcast weighed in on his own take on this topic as well. He's a 9-time All-Star. Obviously, you guys know who Playoff P is, Pandemic P, Podcast P, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, he was talking about Anthony Edwards and on his podcast recently, and it was on Monday's episode of his Podcast P with Paul George show. If you guys are interested in hearing all of the podcast, you can go ahead and check that out. And so the quote that I pulled out from that show was, quote, "I thought it was kind of disrespectful to the game. I thought it was a very immature comment. how much the game has grown, you gotta pay dues to those dudes that did it before us. Excuse me. I had a little bit of a tongue twister there. But I do understand what Paul George is saying, and I do agree with what Paul George is saying, that you have to pay respect to the players before you, as opposed to just, saying that they weren't skilled. Like, as an NBA player, like if you were anyone else, then yes, you can make that claim. But as an NBA player, you have to, you absolutely cannot say that. It's unbearably ignorant. So there's no denying the influx of talent in the NBA. Like, there's so many more talented players now than there were back then. But saying that Michael was the only skilled player is just flat out wrong. Like, that's just flat out wrong. And so, like, Edwards, he's one of the prime examples of what a modern superstar looks like. But athletes, most of the time, they usually pay homage to players who came before them. So what Anthony Edwards said was basically in direct contrast of what most athletes in the NBA usually talk about when they talk about past eras. Because, like, we don't really ever hear an NBA player blatantly disrespect another NBA player, at least, in recent history now. Like, we don't hear anybody do this kind of, that sort of slandering towards past or present or from future NBA players could they possibly be. Again, now, I'm not saying back then, because I remember back then, I don't remember back then, but back then, LeBron, because, I was born, like, when LeBron was drafted, but when LeBron was drafted, like, all of his teammates, they thought that they were all immediately hating on him. And, I mean, obviously, because everybody is going to hate on LeBron, but most of the time, NBA players, they always, like, give the props that other NBA players deserve due to the hard work that they put into the game and all that they've contributed to the game as well. So Anthony Edwards' comments on this are, as I've said before, rather immature, they're rather disrespectful, and I'm sort of, I'm a little bit glad that a lot of other NBA players are, they share the same opinion on this, because, I mean, aside from the fact that these comments are just not true, like, this just paints a false narrative in a lot of players and their history. Like, saying that there was no skilled player back then only would enhance Michael Jordan fans and in a debate when talking about how good players actually were. But then again, you could argue that this also helps LeBron's case, because if people say that Michael Jordan was the only player that had skill, that would mean that LeBron is winning championships against players who have skill, where Michael Jordan is playing against players who don't have skill. So, if anything, that's when I would use that's when I would use it, when I want to be a LeBron fan. But aside from that, no, I would not say that there was, and even then, like, that's just a joke, because I think Magic Johnson was skilled. I think Isaiah Thomas was skilled. I think a lot of there are a lot of Hall of Famers in the 80s and in the 90s that were very skilled. And maybe, could they play in today's league? Maybe not, but still, they were skilled, especially for the time. I mean, Larry Bird, are you going to tell me Larry Bird wasn't skilled? Or are you going to tell me Magic wasn't skilled? And aside from Isaiah Thomas, there's Clyde, there's Charles Barkley. You're going to tell me all of those players just weren't skilled. Even Shaq back in the day. I know Shaq didn't play in the early 80s, but still, like, I mean, Oscar Robertson. You're telling me Oscar Robertson doesn't have any skill? I mean, Wilt Chamberlain. All of those players back then. You're telling me they didn't have some type of skill in basketball? I can't buy that. Especially when you look at clips of Wilt Chamberlain. I don't know if any of you guys have seen video clips of Wilt Chamberlain, but I have seen clips where this man straight up just fadeaway dirks the ball and makes the shot. Like, it's a fadeaway bank shot, like, off of one hand, and it goes in. It's crazy how often it would go in. And, like, you can't tell me that somebody like Wilt wasn't skilled, but That's my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. But aside from that, we're going to go ahead and go into the fourth segment where I continue my list of the top players in the NBA. And we left off at number 19 with Jamal Murray. So we're going to move on to 20, and then we're going to go on to 25 and cap off the list right there. So I'll be right back after this short break. Stay tuned if you guys are interested.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be talking about the top players in the NBA. Again, we left off at number 19 with Jamal Murray. So now we're going to go on and continue with this list at number 20. And we'll start off with naming another underrated player, in my opinion, Domantas Sabonis. And it's kind of ironic that I call him underrated because he was 8th in the running in MVP last season. But get this, he wasn't selected for the All-Star, which is unbelievable. He is ranked 8th in the MVP voting once the season concluded. And he did not get selected to be in the All-Star game, which is criminal. And the numbers that he averaged last season, they're very good. He averaged 19, led the league in rebounds, and was also able to average 8 assists as well, and was also able to shoot 59% from the field, shot 37% from 3. Essentially, Domantas Sabonis is just a shorter, weaker Jokic. If you like, less offensive, I can't even say less offensive, but less impactful Jokic. Let's just put it that way, because I mean, yes, Sabonis's numbers, they are incredibly impactful, 19, 13, and 8, but Jokic, he averaged like 25, 12, and almost 9. So it's like Jokic clearly had the better numbers, and Jokic ended up winning the MVP. So I'm not saying that Sabonis doesn't bring value, but I'm saying that he brings a little less value than Jokic. But it's like, I mean, again, like it's not that big of a deal. I mean, I would love to have somebody average 19, 13, and 8 on my team. Like, please. And obviously, I would rather have Jokic, but Sabonis is still a pretty good option. And I was debating on putting him over Jamal, but for the fact that I haven't really seen much of Sabonis, like, have a lot of success in the postseason, I don't really want to put him, so high, but that's just me. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Next player on this list is going to be Jaylen Brown. Now, Jaylen Brown, he's 21st, and I mean, the biggest reason why he's on this list and so high is because of his Eastern Conference Finals MVP and his Finals MVP that he was able to win for the Boston Celtics. Now, the Finals MVP might not have been one of the more impressive Finals MVPs that we've seen in previous years, but it is still a Finals MVP, and he was still considered the best player on the team. And winning the Finals MVP and the Eastern Conference Finals MVP over Jason Tatum, who was widely considered as the best player on the team, goes to show you just how much talent Jaylen Brown actually has and the value that Jaylen Brown legitimately brings. Because of the two, you wouldn't have thought that Jaylen Brown would be the one that actually ended up getting another trophy, actually 2 more trophies, than somebody like Jason Tatum. Like, you would think that Jason Tatum would win the Eastern Conference Finals MVP or Finals MVP, but no, it was Jaylen Brown. And throughout his entire career, Jaylen Brown has done nothing but get better and better and better. And I sort of think he deserves a spot on this top 25 list, and he should be up there in like at least he should be there in at least 25, and I put him at 21 because of the recent performances and the recent season. Now, next player that I have on this list is Ja Morant. Actually, wait, no. Revoke that. Next player that I have on this list is actually Trae Young. And the reason why I flipped it like almost immediately is because I realized that while Ja Morant, he's been a phenomenal player and he does have a Rookie of the Year accolade under his belt. And while Trae Young doesn't really have many accolades to say that he has, I do also think that Trae Young is one of the more underrated guards in this league. Like, his consistency throughout every season is a little bit underrated. And I'm only talking about the offensive side of the ball because I think that, he's been a 25 point per game, 9.5 plus assist average player in every single season aside from his rookie year. And I think that deserves way more praise than Ja Morant. And so that's why I put Trae Young higher than Ja Morant. But I'm going to put Ja Morant directly after Trae Young on this list. So we'd have 21 Jaylen Brown, then we have 22 as Trae Young, and then 23 as Ja Morant. Now, again, Jaylen Brown, he has the defense, which gives him an edge from both Ja and Trae Young. Trae Young has a lot more consistency, and he was there last season, aside from Ja Morant, which is the big reason why he's getting the nod over Ja, because Trae Young was there in the season. Now, while the Hawks weren't exactly, the best team, they were a mid-tier team, they were still a better team than the Memphis Grizzlies. That's all I can really say about them because they were just meh. But Trae Young wasn't just meh. Now, Trae Young, he did have a little bit of an injury throughout that season. Same thing with Ja. But I would rather have Trae Young's consistency. That's just my opinion. And for Ja Morant, again, I don't know. Something about Ja might just rub me the wrong way. Maybe that's what it is. But I'm just not all that. I'm not a big fan of that. But next player on this list is Tyrese Halliburton. A lot of people were saying that Tyrese was better than Trae Young last season. I completely disagree with that. One ridiculous season is not enough to be able to justify several years of consistency. So, again, the reason why he's on this list is because of, just how ridiculous his season actually was and how much impact he actually, and, his playoff performance and taking the Pacers all the way over to the conference finals, something that I did not expect. Now, obviously, I'm going to take points off of the conference finals appearance, mainly because the the teams that they were up against were riddled with injuries. So I think that was a little bit, a bit of an asterisk on there, just a little bit of an asterisk on there, but still making it all the way to that end of the postseason is still rather impressive. And not to mention, they also did a mid-season trade to get Pascal over to the Indiana Pacers, and that ended up working out phenomenally for the team. And the team was able to adjust to Pascal, and Pascal was able to adjust as well with the team, and they were able to make it pretty far. So I think that should also be able, the chemistry that he's able to have with new teammates and the ability that he has and in being an unselfish player should not get unnoticed. And again, another reason why he's pretty high on this list, he won a gold medal. Now, I know it's like a little bit of a participation award on his part, but still, that's a gold medal. So, excuse me, we have the final player on this list. And it was honestly really tough choosing who number 25 was going to be the last player on the top 25. But I'm going to go. I went with my gut. I wanted to say Paul George. But, like I said before, went with my gut, and I said Jalen Brunson. I think Jalen Brunson is at least the 25th best player in the NBA right now. Just based off of what Jalen Brunson was able to do in the postseason, what he's been able to do on the Knicks, the fact that he's been able to turn the Knicks into a team that captures wins is great. And I think that is something that shouldn't get unnoticed, But it will get. I think it will get unnoticed eventually. But still, I think that this is phenomenal. And I would have, again, it was between him and Paul George, because I do think that Paul George has a much better all-around game than Jalen Brunson. And I do think that Paul George is a vastly better defender than Jalen Brunson. But the impact that Brunson has had with this Knicks team is ridiculous. And a lot of it is because of his ridiculous ability to score the ball. And not only that, he was close to breaking one of Wilt Chamberlain's scoring records in the postseason, and it was really, really close. I believe he tied Jordan at one point with that scoring record, because there was a streak where he was getting like 40 points in every single postseason game, and that hadn't been done until Michael Jordan. And it was ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous. And I have to put him there. But again, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Would you rather have put Paul George in that spot instead? Because I'm open for either or, honestly. And with that out of the way, we are going to cap off that segment, and we are going to go ahead and go into the final segment, which is going to be talking about an NBA player who I feel like did not deserve to win an MVP, in this specific regular season. So I'll be right back after this short break with my list. Well, not really my list, but with my answer. So also, I should say that the year is 1970. So if you want to figure out who won the MVP in 1970, go right ahead before you figure out who I'm going to talk about in the next segment. So I'll be right back. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth segment, I am going to be talking about an NBA player who I feel did not deserve to win an MVP in a specific year over another player. And again, I said that the year was 1970, so yes, we are going into the black and white era of basketball, where images were in black and white and there was no colored cameras. So a lot of you guys might not actually know that there was so many players back in the day that really didn't deserve to win the MVPs that they got, but they ended up getting them anyway. And one of those players is Bill Russell. More on him in future segments. But the player that we are going to be focusing on today is 1970 MVP. If the image is going to want to display, just give me 1 second. Hold on. There we go. Willis Reed. Right. So Willis Reed, he won the MVP in 1970. He averaged 22, 14, and 2 on 51% shooting for the New York Knicks, or the New York Knickerbockers as they were called back then. Or actually, I think they're still called the Knickerbockers now that I think about it. It's just nobody uses them. But aside from that, I mean, he was a phenomenal player back in the day. I'm not saying that he wasn't, but I just don't think that Willis Reed should have won the MVP over somebody like Jerry West in this particular season. So Willis Reed, like I said before, he averaged 21, 13, and 2, but it wasn't as big of a jump in production as it was last season, because he averaged roughly the same numbers in the previous season, yet didn't win the MVP in that previous season. But he averages the same numbers in this season, but he wins the MVP in this season. It's a little bit confusing, but I would have much rather given it to Jerry West as opposed to giving it to someone like Willis Reed. Jerry West in this season, he averaged 32, 5, and 8 on 50% shooting for the Lakers. And one thing that should be taken into consideration, 32 points. So that's 10 more points on roughly the same amount of efficiency, except it's a guard. A guard is shooting almost as efficient from the field as a center. Now, usually that doesn't happen. Usually centers, they shoot much better than guards from the field, because guards, they have to take farther shots than most centers. Most centers especially back in the day, they would back up and they would go under the basket and they'd lay the ball up, or they'd dunk the ball, right? But Jerry West, he was one of those players who had to do something creative. He had to shoot a jump shot. He had to float the ball. He had to lay the ball up. He had to switcheroo. He had to do this, that, and the other. He had to take off dribble shots, all of those things. And yet he was still shooting the same amount of percentage, the same field goal percentage, on much more difficult shots. Meanwhile, Willis was able to shoot the same on easier shots. And on top of that, it's a 10-point difference. When anyone averages 10 or more points, then you'd expect their efficiency to drop off by a bit, but no. It only dropped off by 1. And the 8 assists and the 5 rebounds, they're also rather impressive as well. And a lot of people in the comments and in their head, they might be thinking, well, didn't the 1970 Lakers have Elgin Baylor and Wilt Chamberlain? And to answer your questions, yes, they did. However, those players were injured a lot in that season. I don't remember exactly. How could I remember? I wasn't even born. But I don't remember Elgin Baylor, at least when I looked at his stats, him playing that many games in this particular 1970 season. Because I do know that team was riddled with injuries, particularly from Wilt Chamberlain and Elgin Baylor. So it's not like the team was always 100% throughout the entire season. It was mainly Jerry West putting up the production. And, excuse me. Now, also, it should be noted that, Elgin Baylor in the 1970 season, he played 54 games. Yeah, I know, that's a lot of games. But Wilt Chamberlain, he only played 12 games in this season. So, and Elgin being able to only play about half of the season doesn't help matters either. So, essentially, throughout half of the season, Jerry West didn't have much help in the 1970 season. And yet, he was leading the NBA in points per game. He led the NBA in player efficiency rating, and he also led the NBA in win shares. So, that goes to that gives you guys like, just proof that Jerry West's numbers, they weren't a result of stat padding, but they actually brought value and they brought wins for the team, and it wasn't stat padding. Now, another thing that I feel like I should mention is that Jerry West hasn't won an MVP in his career, but he definitely deserved to win several MVPs throughout his career, and this is by far one of them. Now, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think that Ellis Reed that this record is fine with Ellis Reed? Like, do you guys think that the MVP race was they decided correctly, they chose correctly? Would you have rather seen somebody else other than Jerry West win the MVP? It should also be noted that one of the biggest reasons why probably the biggest reason why I think the Knicks star Willis Reed ended up finishing with the MVP was due to the huge difference in team record. Again, it is a pretty staggering difference, because the Lakers, they finished second in the Western Conference or Western Division as they called it at the time, but the Knicks finished 60-22 at the time. So like the win-loss difference is huge. Now, I understand it, but the Lakers were still second in the entire Western Conference. So it's not like this team wasn't winning. They weren't winning as much as Willis, I understand that, but it's not like this team wasn't winning, and it's not like Jerry West wasn't putting up crazy stats, even arguably better stats than Willis Reed. Like, this is, if you guys remember from the previous podcast, I mentioned that team record is definitely something that should be taken into account when you're looking at the MVP. You're looking at, especially when they both make the postseason, and really like that's like a big decision maker for a lot of these teams. But I do have to say that if both players are averaging good numbers and they're both on top winning teams, I believe it's going to have to go down to, especially at that time, I think it should have gone down to which player was better. Especially at that time. Like, primarily in that particular point in time, it should have been which player was averaging better numbers. And Jerry West was by far averaging better numbers than Willis Reed, while still being in the second seed of the entire Western Conference. And I think that's the reason why he should have deserved the MVP. Now, if Willis had, comparable stats to Jerry West, like if instead of averaging 22, let's say he was averaging 28 or something, then yes, I would understand Willis winning the MVP without a doubt. But 22? No. I'm sorry, but no. And that's just my opinion. And I know that I did not, in one of my lists, I didn't think that Kareem deserved to win an MVP that he won, I believe, in 76, where his team ended up missing the postseason. And I couldn't, in good conscience, just give the MVP to somebody who was playing on a team that did not make the postseason. That doesn't bring value. But if your team makes the postseason, you definitely bring value. And his team, Jerry West's team, was able to make the postseason. Now let me just go ahead and check to see that if I was right on the year, because I hope I was. He won in, what was it? Yeah, it was. I believe it was 70. I believe it was 76 when he won that MVP, and the team ended up missing the playoffs. Yes, yeah, they ended up with a losing record in 76. The Lakers, they had a losing record in 76. So, yeah, they had a losing record. So that's the reason why I had to not give the MVP to Kareem. But the Lakers, they have a winning record, and they have almost 10 more wins than they do losses. Obviously, that's a far cry in comparison to being 60-22, but his stats are also a far cry in comparison to Willis Reed's stats. So, again, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think that they picked correctly? Do you guys think that Jerry West should have won an MVP? Because, again, like I said before, Jerry West should have won multiple MVPs. He didn't win any MVP, but it's not like he didn't deserve to win MVPs. And, now that we're going into the black and white era of basketball, and I say black and white because, the pictures were in black and white. So now that we're going into that era, you're going to hear me say that a lot about Jerry West, and you're also going to hear me say a lot that Bill Russell didn't deserve this or Bill Russell didn't deserve that. So just some foreshadowing for all of you guys. But aside from that, that's all I have on this podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And as usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you have a hot take, a burning question. We're all ears. It's about keeping the conversation lively. And if you really want to make sure your comment or question gets noticed, just go ahead and use Super Chat. You can hit the $sign below the chat box, send in your message, and it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's a great way to support our channel as well. Your Super Chats help us keep the lights on and bring even more content that you love. If Super Chat isn't really your thing, you can always go ahead and use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and tip or donate that way. And that also helps the show. You can also leave your comment there as well, and that would also get mentioned on the show. So either or works. It's your choice. Thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.